Anish, before we go to item 5, could I welcome all the trade unions, labour, youth and representatives of the National Youth Council to the gallery. Most welcome to Chandelier. On behalf of yourself? Yeah. No, hold on. First, before I do that, the question proposed is the bill be now read a second time. The combined opening speeches of the proposer and seconder shall not exceed 16 minutes, and all other senators have 6 minutes. The minister has 15 minutes, and the proposer has 5 minutes to reply. Could I call on the proposer, Senator Nessa Cosgrove? And you're sharing time with
Senator Laura Harman.
16 minutes, 10 and 6, or
11 and 5.
11 and 5.
Yeah.
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
So, Gormalgat, Cahirlock, Agus Fáilte Road Ara, and I'm very excited and delighted to be bringing forward my first bill here to the Senate. Before I start, I want to welcome the many trade unionists here today in the gallery, and also members of the National Youth representatives of the National Youth Council. It's very much appreciated. And there's members. We had an AV room briefing today. It's fantastic, and there was representatives from the Irish Council Trade Union, SIPTU, Connect, Mandate, the Financial Services Union, Aintus Nawak Lane. So there was across the board. There was representatives, and I suppose that's indicative of the importance of this matter that we're raising today. So Owen Reedy, the General Secretary of the Irish Council Trade Unions, he spoke. Maeve Richardson was the Digital Organiser of the Financial Services Union, Paddy Kavanagh, the General Secretary of Connect Trade Union, and Ben Friel, who's the President of the National Union Students up north, and Aintus and Monaghan Lane and Erin. Big thank you also to all the senators and TDs who were able to attend the AV room, and if you weren't, that you sent your representatives, and to those who assisted and advised me on this bill throughout this drafting process. And I want to give a special shout out to John Davey, who's my parliamentary assistant. Advice and input has come from the entire trade union movement, particularly the Irish Council Trade Union, with thanks particular actually to former Senator of this House, Senator Paul Gavin, for his consistent advice and guidance on this. I'm especially grateful also to my immediate predecessors as Labour Party spokesperson on workers' rights, previous Senator Marie Sherlock, and also Deputy Jed Nash, who did so much to bring these issues to the fore. Marie had previously brought legislation before the Shannon seeking the payment of the minimum wage to apprentices in 2023 and interns in 2022. The fact that previous attempts have been made by other parliamentarians demonstrates that the specifics of this bill have political precedence and that they are steeped in the ideals of equality and fairness, which should inform all of our efforts to remake Irish society. The understanding that previous attempts to bring about an extension to the minimum wage bill to all workers was not achieved, unfortunately, during the term of the last Oireachtas, should give, though, fresh impetus to the need to pass this bill here today, which combines the need to fairly and adequately pay apprentices, interns and young people. I'm very grateful to my cross-party colleagues, Senator Laura Harman, Senator Malcolm Noonan and Senator Patricia Stevenson, for allowing us to use our private members' time to be used for this very important bill. The introduction of a national minimum wage into Ireland in 2000, which is 25 years ago now, was a turning point in workers' rights in this jurisdiction. Overnight, on the 1st of April 2000, we saw 22% of workers receive an immediate and significant boost to their income. Today, the minimum wage is set at $13.50 per hour, but 4 months into the new millennium, it was set at just $5.58 per hour, or $4.40 in the old money. While the Minimum Wage Commission had recommended a rate of 70% of the average male wage at the time, the government at the time opted for a rate of just 53% of the average male wage. But despite this shortfall, the immediate impact that has had was immediate. Not in the job losses predicted by those opposed to the introduction, but in the raising of wage levels for all low-paid workers. 163,000 workers, the majority of whom were women and many of whom were under 25, received a pay rise on April's Fool Day 2000. 80,000 of them received an increase of at least £1. That is, their wages rose by a quarter overnight. It seems hard to remember that a different Ireland, an Ireland where employers could choose to pay workers, adults, less than £3 per hour. While most of the low-paid jobs were then, as now, in retail and personal services, other low-paid sectors at the time were highly dangerous and in sectors such as agriculture, forestry and fishing. The introduction of the minimum wage was a transformative experience for the Irish economy because it lifted not only individuals but whole cohorts of workers out of poverty wages. But the job, unfortunately, was never finished. Apprentices and interns were excluded from the benefits of a mandatory minimum wage. Employers were given permission to employ young people at rates consistently and considerably below the national minimum wage. A young person at the moment under 18s is entitled to a wage set at £9.45 per hour, which is 70% of the minimum wage. 18-year-olds are entitled to £10.80 per hour, which is 80% of the minimum wage. And a 19-year-old, 90% of the full rate, which is €12.15 per hour. First-year craft apprentices, which we heard so clearly today, fare often worse, with often rates of £7.67 per hour, which is just 30% of the adult minimum wage. This rises to £11.50 for second-year apprentices before reaching the minimum wage rate in third year. But all of us have many experiences and know fine well that if you're not going to give up a minimum wage job to do an apprenticeship that's nearly going to be nearly half of that wage. And interns fare even worse. But a lot of work has been done in tightening up on the prevalence of unpaid internships over the last number of years. And the law is clear. Anybody who's doing a work of a similar level of responsibility as an employee is an employee and is entitled to the minimum wage. As a result of this, the number of unpaid internships on offer has plummeted. But the fact is that there's still people out there, and a small number of them are still being advertised openly. But I believe that this bill before us today embodies the core values of equality and fairness in the workplace. And it was these values which brought me into trade unionism activity, into politics and into the Labour Party at the very start, many years ago when I became an active trade unionist. Equality and fairness demands that we extend the protections of the national minimum wage to these three groups of workers. Of course, some people do not agree with this logic or with the introduction of this bill. And the most common arguments that I've heard against this, and I've no doubt that we'll hear some of these arguments tonight, from those opposed to the extension of the minimum wage include: the first argument is it will lead to a reduction in employment opportunities for young people. But the same claims were made up in the run to 2000. We saw widespread claims for some employers that a steep rise in unemployment would follow, especially amongst the lowest paid, less skilled workers. The same claims are being made by some employers today that the unintended consequences of this policy is that employers choose not to give an opportunity to those who need the experience. But academic studies and our own experience since the year 2000 have shown that these claims were unfounded. The introduction of a minimum wage had in fact no significant impact upon employment rates among the general public, and there's no reason to think it will have a negative impact upon young workers now. The second argument often given is young people don't need the money, aren't they supported by their parents? While this argument might run true for some 17 or 18-year-olds, we all know 18-year-old students who are working hard, studying and trying to support themselves, whether living away from home or at home. Anyway, many parents can't afford to keep supporting their young workers. Not only does the expense of supporting someone who should be able to support themselves put a strain upon finances of ordinary families, it also has a more insidious effect. It means that many opportunities, such as unpaid internships, are only available to those who have access to the bank of mum and dad. This leads to a continuation, even a magnification of middle-class domination of certain sectors. It's bad for diversity and it's bad for the economy. And what about young parents for whom full-time or part-time work is a necessity? 857 babies were born to teenage parents in 2022. That is 1.5% of all births. Do those 857 babies deserve to be born into systematically engineered childhood poverty? Childhood poverty is something which has a lifelong and multi-generational impact, especially in communities already experiencing poverty. Why wouldn't we challenge childhood poverty from where we can? And many young people don't have access to college, to apprenticeships or to parental funds. Many going into full-time work rather than going on to the third level, not because of a lack of ambition or ability, because this is what they want to do. And young adults generally want to be self-supporting, and I know this from working as a youth worker for many years. The third argument, often given, it is only a small number of apprentices and interns affected by these low rates of pay, and it won't impact upon most apprentices. But the whole point of minimum wage legislation is that it sets a minimum. It's not intended to have an impact on those who are already in receipt of the minimum or who exceed it. This is a piece of legislation designed to raise the floor of wages, not the roof. If it's only going to help a small number, then surely that is the point of any progressive legislation. It is designed to help those who need help the most. Employers tell me that it is increasingly difficult to attract apprentices into the trades, and around 20% of apprentices drop out of their apprenticeships. And the reason is because of low pay. We were actually told today by Paddy Kavanagh and Connect Trade Union that 47% of apprentices in the UK have dropped out in the first year because of low pay. And in the unlikely event that none of us have noticed, we have an acute shortage of housing. We have serious deficiencies in infrastructure and a chronic shortage of skilled craftsmen and women. And we need to address these shortages and deficiencies in any way we can. I know that the Oireachtas Committee on Higher Education is busy preparing a report at the moment on the very issue of apprentice pay, and I fully expect this report to recommend that apprentices are paid at least the minimum wage. The introduction of the national minimum wage had a positive impact in reducing the levels of poverty in the workplace, and this bill will complete this work that started in 2000. It extends the right to national minimum wage to all of those people who are working in our economy. Increasing pay and inducing a benefit to the least well-off while impacting them positively does not negatively impact those who already receive more. Nobody loses with this bill, everybody wins. And I'm hopeful that my colleagues from all parties in the Seanad and the Dáil will agree that change is necessary and that the national minimum wage, inclusion of young persons, apprentices and interns bill 2025 will become law in 2026.
Thank you, Margaret. Anish. Shanador.
Look, I'm very proud to second this bill from my colleague Senator Nessa Cosgrove, and I want to commend all of her work on this. Nessa's been an advocate for workers' rights and young people throughout her whole career, and this goes to the heart of what the Labour Party is about. And I'm really proud to see that this bill is supported by trade unions, student unions and youth organisations all across the country. And I want to note as well that our cross-party group in the Seanad, made up of myself and Nessa, Malcolm Noonan and Senator Patricia Stevenson, we've used every one of our private members' slots to bring forward sensible legislative proposals, and I hope that everyone in this chamber tonight will support this bill. This bill would remove the section of the National Minimum Wage Act which provides for settling lower rates of pay for workers under 20 years of age. And I believe the system that we have currently in place amounts to age discrimination, and it has to end. And this puts a particular strain on young people in terms of covering living costs and often education costs as well, at a time when we have the highest levels of outward youth emigration from Ireland since 2015. We need to be keeping young people in the country, and we need to be encouraging them into sectors where we need them in the workforce. A quarter of employees aged 15 to 19 receive less than the current minimum wage. The majority because they are on sub-minima rates, and some because they are an apprentice. Sub-minima rate employment among young women is 2 percentage points higher than amongst young men as well. And last year, the Low Pay Commission, which was established by the Labour Party, recommended the abolition of these low rates. And the original purpose of these rates back in the 90s was to discourage early school leaving. And this should not be a primary concern now, with Ireland's secondary school completion rates tied amongst the highest in Europe. Another argument in favour of keeping these sub-minima rates is that employers will stop hiring young workers. This is simply false, and research on this shows this. However, it would seem inconsistent to argue both that fewer young people will get work if they are entitled to the minimum wage, and also that this entitlement to a minimum wage would incentivise higher levels of early school leaving. And in terms of apprenticeships, we absolutely need to ensure that we are paying apprentices properly. As Senator Cosgrove mentioned, low rates of pay contribute to dropouts in terms of apprentices, and as Labour spokesperson for further and higher education, this is deeply concerning to me. We have huge issues in terms of our workforce in Ireland, in terms of workforce planning across a number of different sectors, and paying apprentices properly has to be key to solving this. We can't just pay lip service and say we want to encourage more people into apprenticeships if we're not paying them properly. So we absolutely need to ensure that this happens. It's also worth noting that because of inflation from the period of 2022 up until now, an apprenticeship's wage actually has less spending power today, greater spending power, in 2022 than it does today because of inflation, which is another case to increase the rates. More than 1 in 4 apprentices responding to the Connect Union survey in 2024 reported being paid less than the agreed rates, and more than half said completion of their apprenticeship had been delayed by over a year. As well as compromising workers' rights, it also frustrates our efforts to solve the housing crisis and to progress a just transition and meet our climate targets, arguably two of the most urgent needs of today's society. So workforce planning is a huge issue, as I've mentioned previously. And then thirdly, the National Minimum Wage Act also applies to internships, which are a form of employment and not a recognised legal category. And despite this, unpaid internships remain common. So this bill would make it clear that interns, trainees and those undergoing work experience can nevertheless fall under the remit of the Act. And it provides that any person who does more than 30 hours of work within any period of 4 weeks for another person is to be regarded as an employee for the purposes of the Acts, even where there is no contract of employment. And instead he or she is described as a trainee or an intern or as a person on work experience. EU figures show that nearly half of internships are unpaid and over 2/3 don't attract any social protections. So for these reasons, I would encourage colleagues from all parties and none to support this very sensible piece of legislation from my colleague Nessa Cosgrove on a number of grounds, because it's the right thing to do, because of equality, because of age discrimination, because of the benefits to our economy, because of workforce planning. Thanks.
Anish on Shanador Aliko.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Fianna Fáil welcomes this debate, and in line with the recommendation from Government, we will be opposing the bill. As has been outlined, the bill seeks to include young people, apprentices and interns within the full application of National Minimum Wage Act 2000 and 2015 and the extent of entitlement of remuneration of the full national minimum wage to these groups. The National Minimum Wage Act allows for lower or sub-minimum rates of the minimum wage for employees aged 20 years and younger. Those aged less than 18 can be paid 70% of the full minimum wage rate, while those aged 18 and 19 years can be paid 80% and 90% respectively of the full rate. As has been outlined, the Low Pay Commission recommended the abolition of the sub-minimum rates in March 2024. The Commission highlighted in its report that this is a very complex issue. It said that the Government will need to give its findings and recommendations detailed consideration and deliberation, and highlighted the potential need for the Government to take its own legal advice on the matter. It is important to acknowledge the challenges that the enterprise sector has faced over the past number of years. We know that the use of sub-minimum youth rates is largely concentrated in the accommodation, food and retail sectors, and these sectors have reported facing considerable cost pressures. As part of the measures designed to bolster businesses' resilience and support competitiveness, earlier this year the Government agreed to defer a decision on the sub-minimum rates until 2029. I think when talking about this issue, we have to acknowledge the recent significant increases in the minimum wage, which show that the Government continues to commit to fair wages for the lower paid workers in our economy, but also in the context of the Government's introduction of a range of measures to assist workers, including a statutory sick pay scheme, the right to request remote working and other supports. As I said, sub-minimum youth rates are based on a percentage of the national minimum wage. So when the minimum wage rises, young people on these rates see an increase in their wages. It is also important to highlight the very real progress we have made in raising the national minimum wage over recent years. Since 2020, the national minimum wage has increased by 33.7%, from €10.10 to today's rate of €13.50. In January 2026, sub-minimum youth rates will increase by 4.8%, in line with the planned increase in the national minimum wage. In relation to apprentices, it is long-standing policy that they not be covered by the minimum wage, so as to promote and encourage employers to focus on training apprentices. When the national minimum wage was introduced in 2000, it was determined that apprentices should be excluded from the Act to promote and encourage employers to focus on training apprentices while at the same time recognising the cost to employers in terms of time invested and productivity foregone. There are existing industrial relations structures for the negotiation of apprenticeship rates. A forthcoming public consultation on apprenticeships is expected to yield evidence on wage levels and on wage and training costs, and will inform the development of evidence-based policy on the remuneration of apprentices. The Department of Further and Higher Education, Research and Innovation and Science plans to bring the next action plan for apprenticeships to Government for the approval in 2026. This action plan will strive to further grow apprenticeships opportunities to meet the Government targets of 12,500 annual registrations by 2030. For interns, such arrangements as may be described as internships are not defined by Irish legislation, and use of the term intern has no bearing on the determination of the employment status of an individual engaged. Given all of the above, Government advised that it is not appropriate to make such fundamental changes to the remuneration of young persons, apprentices and interns as proposed in this bill. I will leave it at that for now, Cathaoirleach.
Before I call on the next speaker, could I welcome guests of Senator D. Ryan to the Distinguished Visitors Gallery, Conor Nuna Quigley and the Quilly and Éanna and Oisín. You're most welcome to Shannon, and thanks for coming here. I hope you enjoy your visit to Shannon, and thank you, Senator Ryan, for bringing me here. I believe is Una a big fan of history, so I think that's an understatement. Anish, the next speaker is Senator Linda Nelson-Murray.
Thank you very much, and you're welcome, Minister. And first of all, congratulations on bringing this bill forward. For yourself and for all the hard work I can see by your colleagues, you've put a lot into it, and fair play to you. And unfortunately, I am opposing it, but I think you're a great person, and well done. In Ireland, the minimum wage framework reflects the realities of our labour market, particularly in sectors like retail, hospitality, agriculture and leisure, where young people often take their first steps into employment. It's been mentioned the different rates of pay, from under 18 at €9.45 up to €13.50 and moving to €14.15. So for a 20-year-old working 40 hours a week, that equates to 28,000 at the moment. From January, that'll be 29,000. And to put this wage in perspective, a nurse that graduates out of college will earn 30,000. Should a 16, 17 or 18-year-old earn that? From 2020 to 2026, the minimum wage will have increased by 44%, which is a great thing. Over the same period, consumer prices increased by just 19.8%. Ireland has the second highest minimum wage in Europe, followed by, only after Luxembourg. This debate is not about the worth of youth workers, because as a business owner who has been hiring workers of all ages, it is an absolute privilege to hire young people. Why? Because you see that first nervous, first-time worker come in, whose mum or dad has generally been the person who handed in the CV. They are dropped in, picked from work. They do a few hours on a Saturday and Sunday. Then month by month, you see them blossom, thriving in their role and want to take on more responsibility, which is absolutely fantastic. But that 16-year-old who has started simply cannot do the work of the 19-year-old who has perhaps been with us or other businesses for over a year. This debate is about recognising genuine differences in responsibility, experience and contribution, differences that are especially clear in these sectors: agriculture, leisure, retail and hospitality. In retail, for example, I would just like to give you some stats. 326,000 people are employed directly in retail. Employment in wholesale and retail declined by 17,200 in the year Q4 2024, and the retail sector employment specifically declined by 7,100 jobs. They are under pressure, and each retail closure costs the state 6.2 million annually. A 20-year-old working in retail is far more likely to work full shifts, handle cash independently, manage stock, open or close stores and supervise younger staff during busy trading periods. A 16-year-old, while absolutely capable and willing, is often legally restricted in hours and duties and requires closer supervision. And I can tell you for sure there's no way I would allow my daughter, when she reaches 16 or 17, to be left to open and close shops. But for when she returns 19 or 20, I'll back her all the way to do it. In Ireland, under the Childcare Act 1991, the Children Act 2001 and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a child is defined as anyone under the age of 18. What a child is allowed to do is restricted by their age. Workers aged 16 or 17 are classed as young persons. What I'm saying here doesn't mean I don't think young people should work. Quite the opposite, in fact. They should absolutely be working and be rewarded to do so. I started work at 13 and I haven't stopped. And I think it's very important that young people go out to work and support themselves, learn the value of money and progress to earn more. In hospitality, the distinction is even clearer. Hotels, cafes and restaurants rely on staff who can work late nights, weekends and peak seasonal hours. A 20-year-old can legally serve alcohol, work unsocial hours and take a great responsibility during high-pressure service periods. A 16 or 17-year-old cannot. Paying both the same ignores these operational realities. In agriculture, younger workers are often engaged in seasonal or part-time roles that are carefully structured around school communities. Older workers are more likely to operate machinery, work longer days and take responsibility for animal welfare, health and safety, compliance and independent decision-making, duties that rightly attract a higher pay. In leisure and tourism, gyms, cinemas, amusement centres and visitor attractions, 19 and 20-year-olds are more likely to be entrusted with customer safety, cash management, loan working, emergency procedures. These are roles requiring maturity, availability and accountability. In our business, someone coming in at 16 would generally help with parties, become party hosts, supervise children playing and work on the floor. And as they progress, they move to reception, helping to prepare food, analysing figures, idea generation for promotions, rostering other staff, opening and closing. Across all these sectors, employers invest significant time and resources into training younger workers. Sub-minimum youth rates help offset those costs while keeping entry-level jobs available. Without that flexibility, many businesses, particularly small local employers, would simply hire fewer younger people. Crucially, this system is about progression, not permanent inequality. Youth rates are designed to be temporary. In many cases, if you have a 16 or 17-year-old starting on the lower rate of 70% of the minimum wage, by the time they're 20, and if they're a really good worker, they will be on substantially more than the actual minimum wage, because I'm telling you, as a sensible employer, you do not want to let that person go. Senator Cosgrave, gone are the days when employers can take advantage of workers, as we've implemented so many policies to protect them. In Ireland, we have the second highest minimum wage in all of Europe. When it comes to apprentices again, I think that is right. And if we are talking about introducing higher minimum wages here, I do feel it will prevent many trades from taking on apprentices. Apprentices come in to learn a life skill, to become a specialist in their field, but only after they've done their apprenticeship. You can become a soloist apprentice at the age of 16, which is great, but you cannot become an apprentice in the Army, the Air Corps until 18. You cannot join the Garda Síochána until 18. You cannot claim unemployment benefits such as job seekers or job seekers allowance until you're 18. You cannot drive a car until you're 18. You cannot drink, cannot smoke, cannot vape, cannot gamble. There's a reason for all of this. So just to finish, as workers gain experience, complete training and reach adulthood, their pay increases accordingly, and that is the right thing to do. Equality does not mean treating everyone identically. It means recognising difference fairly. Paying a 19-year-old more than a 16-year-old within Ireland's minimum wage framework reflects the realities of retail floors, hotel kitchens, farms, leisure facilities across the country. It supports employment, protects opportunity and recognises responsibility. Thank you.
I want to start by saying how much I stand here in admiration of my colleagues, dear colleagues, Nessa Cosgrave, Senator Cosgrave and Senator Laura Harman, and indeed all her group as well, and the people who are here the days before Christmas, at a time when lots of other people are among a gin of kosher agus ceol in Snatiha Taverne in Ahacht and Kahar Nacht. But Christmas, at a time when lots of other people are among a gin of kosher agus ceol in Snatiha Taverne in Ahacht and Kahar Nacht. But we're here to signal our stance in being with the senators in proposing this enlightening bill. And about this time last year, I was given a book by a friend called The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist, and many people here will know it and have read it. It was written by a chap called Robert Tressel, who was a pen name for a Dublin lad called Robert Noonan, and he detailed the life of a painter in Edwardian England, died afterwards of tuberculosis, but he outlined the grim struggles that people had in the trades then of trying to make ends meet, and the absolute connivance and the exploitation that was done, and the lack of fixity in the employment of his friends. It was an odious story, but a very enlightening story just to illustrate the human ability to exploit one another. And many of us as well would know Ken Burns' excellent series on the Civil War in America. And that's only maybe 50 years prior to Robert Tress's book. And that was on a fundamental basis of exploitation as well, in the guise of a thing called slavery, which of course we all abhor now at this remove. But the common thread between that is that different work and different effort was treated differently from different people. And if you believe at all in the essence of human dignity, you have to abhor that state, because every person has the right to sell their labour at the going rate, and that's an inalienable right for every person. And I think that's what's at the basis of this proposed legislation. It signals that if you're young, or in the case of some of the population, if you're old, you shouldn't have the cost of your labour truncated or minimised because of the number of years that you've spent on the earth. It's a fundamental good that you're selling, and you have the right to get a fundamentally fair pay for it. And that's what we're talking about here. And I'm not going to take up all that much time, because the points are very simple here. And Abraham Lincoln said, that I'm going to appeal to the minister and the members of the government. You can spend the night quoting statistics about this question, but statistics will not alter the basic truth. The basic truth is that this is about fairness and equality and the right of people, that inalienable right of people, to put a price on their wage and not to have it minimised. And Lincoln said that, when he was trying to bring the southern states round to his way of thinking on the slavery question, he said, I'm appealing to the better angels of your nature. So, senators from the government and minister, we all here are just, don't give us the old claptrap that it's going to fundamentally break. There was no problem getting 700 million for the hospitality industry, but when the youngsters are trying to get a fair deal in the wage market, there's no 700 million for them, because they will be discriminated against and paid a lower wage, and that's not sustainable. So I'm asking you, in the spirit of righteousness, the better angels of your nature, you cannot oppose the logic and the fairness and the rightness of this bill. And all of the figures and all of the statistics that you throw out tonight, they don't mean nothing, because it's all about fairness and the right to equal pay for equal work. Fundamental as that.
But before I call on the next speaker, could I welcome guests of Senator Brady and Councillor Anna Granger and Seamus Keane from Longford and Tommy Gilroy, all the way from the United States of America. You're most welcome to Shandir. Carmina Mahler for being here. Anish on Shandir Tully.
First of all, I want to commend Senator Cosgrove for introducing this bill and her colleagues. I think it's really worthwhile, and Sinn Féin will be supporting the bill because it is a basic thing. It's equal pay for equal work, and anything other than that, it's discriminatory, it's exploitative, and it amounts to cheap labour, and it is open to abuse by some employers. I mean, young people, whether they're 17 or 21, they pay the same rate of tax and PRSI and USC, so they are entitled to be paid the same rate for the same work. I just think the whole concept is outdated and old-fashioned. And I think when the reduced rate of minimum pay was introduced, it was to encourage young people to take up part-time work but not to leave school. Times have changed significantly, as Senator Harman has outlined. We have one of the highest rates of secondary school completion and one of the highest rates of uptake in higher education. Costs have changed as well. Like, young people have significant costs that you can't expect the parents to cover, such as their phone, transport, accommodation, and especially if they're in education and living away from home. Just cost of living in general affects young people as much as it does any of the rest of us. And it's affecting their families as well. All of our families are feeling the pinch. My party colleague Paul Gavin introduced very similar legislation when he was here in the Shannon, and I know I have colleagues in the Dáil who are actually considering, again, similar legislation for introduction there very soon. And this has been abolished in Germany, in Spain and in Belgium, and in Korea and in Canada. So I think we need to follow suit. My son was working recently in a hotel, and he started work there. He was under 18, and he was being paid $9.45 an hour. And when he reached 18, it went up to $10.80. And other people in there were 19 or 20 or plus, 20 plus. They were all doing exactly the same work. The work didn't change when he just suddenly turned 18. He was able to carry out the same work as anybody else aged 17 or 18 or 19 or etc. And I just don't think it's fair that someone is paid like over €4 an hour extra just because they're a few years older and they're doing precisely the same work. And often the work that our young people do is very hard work. They work on sociable hours, they work weekends, they work late at those hours, they work in pubs, they work in takeaways. They're often subjected to abuse from people coming into those establishments, and they deserve to be paid properly. We don't have gender discrimination, we should not have age discrimination. In relation to internships, it's become the situation that it's only for the wealthy to take up internships because people can't afford to live without being paid. So you can't afford to take up an internship where you're being paid little or nothing for that year because of the cost of living, again, accommodation, etc. So it's only people from wealthy families whose parents can support them can actually now take up an internship. In relation to apprenticeships, like, we need to increase the number of people participating in apprenticeships, especially in the construction sector. We need houses, but that's not actually happening. And the poor pay, particularly for the first 2 years, is not enticing people to enter apprenticeships. One young man who lived near me, he left school at 17 or 18. He did something for a few years, and then he decided to do an apprenticeship as an electrician. He was receiving just over €7 an hour in his first year, and that went up to 8 something an hour in his second year. Like, that's not sustainable. And there are many older people who are considering taking up an apprenticeship, but they can't afford to. These could be people who are now married with children and a mortgage and have additional costs. And we need them to take up apprenticeships, but it's a disincentive, the pay at the moment. There are other issues as well, and as they were addressing them in the Committee on Higher Education. But we need to incentivise people to take up apprenticeships and make it attractive, especially as 3 out of 5 of our young people are considering leaving the country currently. And we need them to stay here. So we need to incentivise them to take up apprenticeships or to take up work here. And we were talking about the National Training Fund and the change of use of the National Training Fund. Maybe we should be looking at the National Training Fund as a source of funding to support our apprenticeships, our apprentices in getting better pay within the work they're doing. So I am supporting the bill. We're supporting the bill in Sinn Féin. Thank you.
Senator Alice Mary Higgins.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to stand in support of the bill from Nessa Cosgrave and Laura Harman and indeed the other members of the cross-party group. I think it's incredibly disappointing to see the bill not being supported across the House. I think it sends a deeply disappointing message to young people in Ireland and to young workers, because one of the areas where I look at it a lot is in the area of higher education. We've seen when we have a situation of inequality in relation to wages, when you have a systematic measure that allows for the cutting of costs, those measures do get used and they do get exploited. And we hear a lot about business costs as being one of the rationales. Being clear, the cost, what is happening here is we're asking young workers, 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 19-year-olds, to supplement the profits of a business by working at a lesser rate, because the costs don't disappear. It's more that the costs are now being put onto younger workers who are giving their time which is as precious as anybody else's time, who have the same kinds of costs in many cases. They're paying for food, they're paying for rent, they're paying, they don't get a lesser rent, because if you're contributing to the family's rent, you don't get to pay a lesser rent because you're 18, or if you're indeed, in some cases, managing a household on your own, or have dependents, which many people do also, under 21. The costs don't go down for those in terms of the costs of living, yet we're asking that what is already, by its definition, a minimum wage, not the living wage, the minimum wage, and which actually, and this is another issue I have in general in relation to this legislation, I might signal if it comes through to committee stage, it's one I'm going to be examining, I have legislation myself on. We already have a problem with the minimum wage directive legislation, that it doesn't consider adequacy. So one of the factors in considering and deciding what is the minimum wage each year, they weigh up, there's already a weighing up when they go to looking at the minimum wage to say, what are the impacts on the economy, what is the impact on businesses? There's a whole raft of factors that go in to determining that there is a wage which is a wage that can be borne by business and by the economy, and currently it isn't a factor when they calculate that to assess to what extent is that actually an adequate wage that people can live on. Adequacy is the big missing word that's in that legislation, but that's a separate day's discussion. But the key thing is, we have a process whereby we determine that there is a minimum wage, and we say that is what everybody can expect to work on. And business groups are represented at the Low Pay Commission where that's determined. They get to have a say in the discussion. In fact, the Low Pay Commission, which again contains representatives from all sectors, not anecdotal stories from people in individual businesses, but actual representatives of business, of unions, academic experts and others, they have recommended twice now that sub-minimum rates would be removed. They recommended it in 2024 and called for it as an urgent action. They recommended it again in July 2025 and said this is an action. These are the actual experts from right across every sector, not all coming from a union perspective, far from it. I think unions are underrepresented in that body. And they've said the evidence, and the ESRI have examined it, they've also said the evidence doesn't add up, and that there isn't a case for sub-minimum rates, and indeed there is a case against the sub-minimum rate. So we have all the experts, we have the government's own body, we have that this is a minimum wage, and then we're saying, except we feel that we can get away with, because let's be clear, that's what it is, we feel we can get away with paying younger people less. And if you can get away with paying younger workers less, the great thing about that is you cut your costs a little bit. And maybe you can keep hiring younger people. Because that idea, they're all being paid low because they're being brought up to these wonderful jobs that they get to. Let's be very clear. If you are letting bottom line set policy, bad policy in this case, that bottom line is going to keep saying, well, we can fire that 21-year-old and hire another 19-year-old again. And that doesn't happen in every instance, but it does happen in certain industries. Some of the industries we've been hearing about, in fact, this evening, actually have a very poor practice in terms of retaining workers and giving them a proper period of time and proper ladders to build up. So when you are paying some workers at a lower rate, it is bad for all workers. It is undercutting all workers. It is damaging entry level for everybody. It is minimising the opportunities for the 24-year-old who wants to go back into a new sector and start work versus an 18-year-old. It puts them at a disadvantage in entering a new field, for example. Like, it is an anomaly in the system and a problem that needs to be addressed. This bill does it. I would say, I want to also on the intern piece to say again, this is a problem for society. If we end up where, and there's very clear exemptions, where it's an educational, where there's genuine training program, where there's an educational program, it allows for internships in those circumstances that may not be remunerated. But if it is simply we are asking you to work for free or for cheap in an industry without any educational training context, then you are saying only certain people will get that rung on the ladder, and those who can afford to do it for little or nothing. That is disadvantageous to the variety and diversity we need in every sector if we make rungs of the ladder of progress unavailable effectively to many in society. So I really urge support for this and recommend and commend it to the House. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. At the outset, can I welcome my colleague, Minister Dillon, to the House and recognise the great work he does in his department and how proactive he is, and I look forward to hearing his views on this matter later. I want to just say that I also want at the outset to congratulate Senator Cosgrove and her colleague on introducing the legislation. I think you did. It's a great thing that you initiated this debate here. I want to say that I personally believe in principle, and I'm going to commend to the Minister, and indeed will be commending another for us to my party, that we have to make this a position that we want to achieve, that we have to achieve the minimum wage for all workers, irrespective of age and of status, etc. Because by and large, they do the same work, and I'll come back to all that. There's a few interesting things. When I attended the briefing on this today, and I'm sorry, I was distracted with another matter there, and I'm just getting my notes, but I attended a briefing on this today, and there are a few interesting statistics on this, and I'd be interested in the Minister's response to them as well. Already roughly 5 out of 6 employers already pay the minimum wage to all their workers. It's a very small section who don't. And that's a relevant statistic. Now, of course, the question arises, and I had calls today myself on this, for some employers, it could be very challenging. But my contention, Minister, is that we will have to find ways of supporting those employers otherwise. And we did go some journey towards that with the VAT in the budget, the VAT rates in the budget. There was initiatives during COVID around rates, etc. And there will have to be ways of dealing with. Nobody wants to put employers out of business, and one has to recognise, and I would be the first, because I do live in the real world and I do meet a lot of people, and I would be the first to recognise that this is challenging for particular employers, and in those instances I think strategies have to be devised as part of the solution. But the solution for those employers is not to put them into a different category of wage rates to the general, and they should be put into tandem with the other employers who are already paying it. So that's a very important point that I would want to make at the outset. And I think that really is a critical matter. Now, so I think that argument holds up very strongly, that we recognise the very small, and there will be small, number of employers who have a difficulty, and that we support them otherwise. I think the next thing that's very valid, and it has been made on the other side of the House here, is that children are no longer, or young people are no longer in the position where it was an important disincentive for leaving school. Attitudes, cultural attitudes, values have changed fundamentally in society in this regard, and thank God that they've changed. And I think we have to recognise that, and that's a kind of an unnecessary canard at this stage. Now, the big issue that I think really jumps out at me, not just at the briefing that I attended today, but on common sense and observation, and that is the whole question around apprenticeship. And this is a very critical issue. If we need, according to experts, and you would have much more knowledge in this sphere, Minister, and you might comment on this, my understanding is that by 2030, we will need 80,000 more craft workers to achieve our infrastructural ambitions, to achieve our housing ambitions. And if that's to be the case, well, then we have to encourage apprenticeship. And we can't, it's no logic in saying to young people, oh, you should become apprentices. There's nothing very glamorous at getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go in a van to Dublin. So, yeah, and yet it is a wonderful thing to do an apprenticeship to achieve a trade. But I think you have to make it attractive for apprentices. And I think there is no way out of this, out of paying them. So quite apart from a moral position on this and an ethical position that everyone is equal under the law and equal under God and equal in society, apart from that ethical position, there's a more economic compulsion or an economic need to actually do this, because we do need to attract apprentices, we do need to train up electricians, craftspeople, right across the whole range of people. So those are the arguments, and I'm interested in your response, Minister, and I think basically, and the last thing on this is, of course, all work is equally valuable, and it is the case, as Senator Tully did say, that my understanding that if somebody goes into catering or whatever they go into, that they fundamentally do the same work from day one. There will be a short learning curve, but they're fundamentally doing the same work. My good colleague and friend Senator Crowe would have much more expertise in this area, but it's my understanding that they basically do the same. But so what I'd say, I look forward to your response, Minister. I think it's something that we should be committed to achieving and to put into processes to get it done. Thank you.
I said to my two colleagues, Senator Cosgrove and Harman, there was a time when I thought Labour had lost their soul. I'm delighted to see that you have a soul, and I'm delighted to see that you're prepared to nail your colours to the mast here. And there's young people in the gallery today, and if ever you needed a reason to join a trade union, you're hearing it tonight. And you're hearing it because the animal instincts of capitalism are alive and well. You've heard the nonsense statements that have been made. No worker should ever work the same hours, do the same amount of work for less money than their colleagues. I don't care whether you're working in a shop, in a hotel, on a building site. My colleague, the last speaker, spoke about people getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get onto a dirty, cold building site for a few miserable euros per hour. And who's benefiting from it? The employer. The bottom line on it is, this is a wonderful bill, a short bill. There's not a whole lot to it, but it highlights the inequality that exists in our society. And by the way, while you mention apprentices and interns, we miss out on the professions like the legal profession and the accounting profession who exploit young people who go into work. The exploitation of young people has been the vein of this country. It is wrong in every way. I'm aware of apprentices who had to buy cars in order to travel to the sites they were working on. They couldn't afford to have a car and a social life. It was one or the other in order to get themselves trained. Apprenticeship is a bit like religion. If you believe in it, you'll be rewarded in the next life. And that was the way it was. I started my working life as an apprentice. So I did. £1.50 a week. That was 59 years ago, right? £1.50 a week. I got a better job as a barman, £2.50 a week, so I packed it in. Why would you bother picking up a qualification, a skill that would have left me wealthy for all of my life? I packed it in because I could get more money as a barman, which led to 16 different changes of career throughout my life. The last one being into Shannon, and thanks so much to Fine Gael for electing me on that day. The truth of the matter, Minister, I know somebody somewhere is pulling the string here and saying, you know, we're hearing all the things about legal advice and about in time. My first colleague and good friend from Galway said that this would be looked at in 2026. So why reject and oppose the bill? Why not just say we'll bring it back in 2026 with whatever amendments are needed? Why kill it tonight? Kill it in front of trade unionists and in front of young people, the future voters. And I would say to those voters, you see what the left think, and you see what the capitalists think. Make up your own mind. I'm an independent, always support good independents. We're very good. Interns. Some of you in this building will know that interns have come in here and worked for members of this House and got nothing for it. That is wrong in every sense of the word. I had a student when I was teaching in Blackrock, placed him in a company in Galway for his work experience. And at the end of 3 weeks, the employer turned to him and he said, "Thanks very much, I'll send a nice report back to your college." And the young fellow rang me and he said, "I've been doing a lot of work for this guy," he said, "and I see he's invoicing the work I'm doing. What do you think?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "I think I should be paid for it." And I said, "Well, go and tell him that." And the employer rang me and he said, "That cheeky little so-and-so you sent to me has asked me to pay him." And he says, "I was giving him work experience." I said, "Well, hang on a minute. It was computers he was working on." I said, "Did he repair the machines?" He said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Did you invoice the people for the work he did?" And he said, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Do you not think his labour was then worth money?" And he said, "Well, actually, you're right." And he paid him. And immediately the course finished, he hired him, right? And the guy and the employer got on very well together and had great work. That's respect for a worker. That is respect for a worker. I think Senator Cosgrove mentioned mum and dad funding your apprenticeship. I'm delighted to say I have 2 children and I never funded anything for them. Once they hit a certain age, they went out and they worked their way through lives and got their professions. They worked hard, and I have no doubt they were exploited at the early stage of their careers. It is so wrong to reject this bill. And Minister, you have the power to stand up here tonight and say, "Do you know what? I reject what the party is saying. I reject what the government is saying. I'm going to take my courage in my hands and I'm going to say to these 2 wonderful senators, I will defer further discussion on this bill until 2026 when we'll all come back here and have a wonderful get-together and deliver for apprentices in this country. And you can go down the west this weekend heading towards Christmas and you can meet apprentices in the Welcome Inn in Castlebar and say, 'I stood with ye.' You can do that. Or you can go down and say, 2 Labour guys tried to run a bill past me so you guys could actually have Christmas, right? Bottom line on it is we need to wake up and we need to deliver for young people. I would beg you, Minister, take your courage in your hand.
Inish on Shannon Collins.
And I want to echo my appreciation to my colleagues here beside me for bringing this really important bill into the House. I'm going to focus on the apprenticeship side of this bill. So apprentices are the backbone of our economy, and in many respects they're the backbone of rural Ireland. They are the electricians, the plumbers, the carpenters, the mechanics that we depend on to build our homes, maintain our infrastructure and sustain local communities. Yet too often they're expected to survive on wages that do not reflect either the value of their work or the cost of living crisis that they live in. This is felt most acutely in rural Ireland. Apprentices frequently have no choice but to travel long distances for work and training. They are being hit at every corner by rising fuel costs, by increased transport expenses and higher everyday living costs. For many, these pressures make apprenticeships financially unviable, forcing talented young people out of trade and that we desperately need, or even worse, emigrate abroad. Sinn Féin has always been clear. We support measures that improve pay and conditions for workers. Paying apprentices fairly is not only a matter of equality and dignity, it is essential if we are serious about addressing skill shortages and delivering housing and infrastructure the country desperately needs. At the same time, we also recognise that this must be done responsibly. Any changes must be accompanied by appropriate interventions to support the employers, particularly the small and medium enterprises, so that apprentices are not unfairly dismissed or passed over as a result of improved pay protections. Fairness for workers must go hand in hand with sustainable employment. Ultimately, this bill moves us toward an Ireland that works for all. If we value apprentices as workers,
invest in them properly and support employers through the transition, we can build a fairer economy and a stronger rural communities. I mean, it's fairly stark to hear that 20%, if not more, of our young apprentices actually leave their trade before they're fully qualified. And I find it actually a little bit depressing and a bit hypocritical to hear everybody on the other side of the floor stand up and talk about how we don't need to pay them. But on the other hand, we have a housing crisis and we're going to do everything we possibly can to get out of this housing crisis. But you're not going to pay the workers that are actually going to get us out of the housing crisis. Doesn't make any sense. So well done to my colleagues on bringing this forward. And I really hope that you listen to my other colleague over here and stand up for what you actually should be standing up for. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome guests of Senator Padraig Grady and Senator Dee Ryan and Minister Neil Richmond, who are all in the gallery today, and especially the Quigleys from Limerick. You're very welcome. You're guests of Senator Ryan, so hope you all enjoy the visit here to Leinster House this evening. Senator Noonan.
4 and 2 with...
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed.
I'll go first, yeah. Alaska Hearing, Fáil Teara. Minister, a number of weeks ago I attended the KCETB Apprenticeship Awards ceremony in Kilkenny, and certainly it was a very proud day for those young men and women and their families, and certainly the ceremony added greatly to the significance of their collective achievements. And I don't need to tell you how much we need these young apprentices in our economy right now, an economy that is running at full tilt. I saw myself when I was in a previous role, particularly around the heritage sector, where young apprentices in thatching, signwriting, stonemasonry were working side by side with professional contractors. Contractors were paying them well because they knew they'd stay, and they needed those young people. And this bill is about creating parity, about equality, and ensuring that they are valued as apprentices from day one, that they feel that they are part of a team, part of a bigger picture. I think other members have also spoken about the dropout rates, which are really significant, and they should be of concern to government, not just from the perspective of an economy going full tilt, but from the perspective of the well-being and self-esteem of those young people. This bill won't end those dropout rates to zero, but it will ensure that young people, apprentices in precarious financial situations, will be able to make better decisions, more informed decisions, not based on simply not being able to afford to keep going. And that could set young people back in life a great deal. So again, I'm disappointed, greatly disappointed, and I want to thank my comrade Senator Cosgrove and my other two comrades here in the cross-party group. Thank the trade unions for supporting this. I'm really disappointed that government is choosing to oppose this, but very proud to work with our cross-party group in bringing this forward.
Senator
Stevenson. Alaska Hearlock, I'm very proud to be supporting Nessa Cosgrove in her bill. Dignity and equity at work should not be something that you age into. That young workers are paid less than their peers but expected to do the same work is labour exploitation. Simple as. You can be working the same job with the same responsibility, the same effort, but yet totally different pay because of your age. Sub-minimum wages discriminate against young people, and it really is actually that black and white. Instead of looking at ways the government can support employers through lower energy costs, lower insurance rates, affordable rents, targeted supports to SMEs, so that they can actually manage the increased salary impact that it might have on their business, the government still chooses to neglect the workers, many of whom are working to support themselves, perhaps through college, saving up for college. And in fact, with the cost of living crisis we have in this country, unfortunately, there are kids, young people, who are working to support their families, to pay energy bills, to put food on the table. That is the reality of people across this country. We might not like to face that or look at that reality, that families are struggling so much that teenagers are having to go out and put money in their parents' bank accounts. On the question of apprenticeships, the average starting age for an apprenticeship these days is between 23 to 30 years of age. These people have rents to pay, they might have children to support. The landlord doesn't give a discount based on sub-minimum wages. They don't get 30% off their grocery bills. Bringing in a minimum wage for all employees in apprenticeships, regardless of age and occupation, is actually only the first step. I must also remind the Chamber that the national minimum wage is significantly below the living wage. Highly profitable multinational fast food operators will save millions thanks to the newly reduced VAT rate gifted to them in this government's budget. Will we see these extra profits funnelled towards the real value makers in our society? Who are? The workers. Does the government believe in 2025 that working for sub-minimum wages somehow builds character?
When meaningful, well-paid employment is hard to come by for young people, who wouldn't look for alternatives? We heard it before. Who wouldn't look to alternatives such as immigration, going overseas? ICTU's 2024 survey of apprentice pay is shocking. The average hourly wage for first-year apprentices across construction, electricians, mechanics is €8.67. The dropout rate is 20%. Almost all of those who drop out cite low pay as the reason. While most employers are good employers, the fact of the unregulated, wildly inconsistent apprenticeship scheme means some employers have the complete freedom to exploit young workers should they wish. And unfortunately, we do have lots and lots of examples, horrifying examples, of young people being exploited in the labour market. The state is crying out for skilled construction workers. We're crying out for electricians. We're crying out for stonemasons, mechanics, brickies. We're crying out for carpenters. Although the numbers of apprentices has risen on previous years, I think we still need an extra 30%. That's almost 3,000 per year apprenticeships. How are we encouraging people to do that? And this is not simply a matter of fairness. This is about facilitating high-quality apprenticeships, high-quality in jobs, which encourage people into the construction workforce, which we so desperately need. This is why it is essential that we pass this legislation to end the exploitation of young workers, of interns and apprenticeships. I also think it's worth pointing out that the adequate minimum wage EU directive, if we don't pass this, we will not comply with that when it comes to the question of minimum wage. So it's something that, if it's not passed today, the government may well be returning to this issue if we're not in compliance with the EU legislation. And I really want to support Senator Cosgrove. She has been systematic in her support both for young people and on labour rights issues since becoming a senator. And this is, as Senator Harman said, it is a sensible bill. It is a logical bill. And if we don't do this, we will be returning to this issue again and again, because there is no rationale for us not to do this. As we've already heard tonight, it was only introduced, the question of 16, 17-year-olds having less pay was only introduced as a means of keeping people in the education sector in the first place. And we have fantastic rates of education retention for people going through to college. So why would we not pay people who unfortunately are suffering to pay their families' bills to work? It's not simply summer jobs that we see young people working in. That's the reality of the cost of living crisis, which is affecting families across the country. Thank you.
Good. Sarah O'Reilly.
I want to welcome this bill and thank Nessa and Laura for bringing this bill forward. And it's a really important bill because every week in this chamber, myself and other senators come into the Shannon and talk about the cost of living. Everything has gotten so expensive. We've seen increases in the cost of energy, groceries, motor tax, tolls, fuel, and you name it. People coming from Cavan are spending around €30 a day return trip to Dublin for work. And as Senator O'Reilly has said earlier, young apprentices in our town leave town about 5:30 in the morning. They spend 2.5 hours in traffic sitting on the M50 and returning, and it's a huge cost to them. I do genuinely believe that there is a value in having to work your way towards a goal and value in learning on the job, but currently the rate of pay for young people and apprentices in particular is just degrading. A first-year apprentice is earning only $7.67 an hour, and it's hardly surprising that there's been a 20% dropout rate among apprentices over a 3-year period. How can we tell people to go into the trades when 4 hours of work will just cover the cost of the fuel to get to work? There are people who want to change careers and are interested in potentially becoming an electrician or a carpenter, but they can't because the financial blow would be just too great to bear. Internships, too, are a great opportunity for young people, but unfortunately, they can be exploited. And we see young people working full-time hours and getting little to no reimbursement. That is totally wrong, and it also excludes young people from brilliant opportunities if they can't afford to go weeks or months unpaid. It's just nonsense that a 20-year-old and a 19-year-old could be doing the exact same job, but only one of them is getting the minimum wage. And I would encourage the government to support this bill. And if you are hesitant to support it, please try and imagine what it's like to live of €8 an hour. Gurmagat.
As there are no other senators, I now come the Ara. Gurmagat.
Las Cohirlock, and firstly I want to thank all the senators for their very insightful and important contribution to this debate. And again, just to congratulate Senator Cosgrove on the introduction of her first bill to the Seanad, and indeed Senator Harmon for seconding it, and all the bill sponsors and those groupings who have supported this. I've no doubt significant effort and time and consideration went into the drafting of the bill, and we want to just acknowledge that. Indeed, it is a really important issue. It is one that the subject around pay entitlements for young people, apprenticeships and those working as interns are really important. It's something that government wants to continue to support, and indeed when considering any changes to the national minimum wage regime, we have to make sure we strike the right balance between fair and sustainable rate of pay for low-paid workers, and also one that does not have a significant impact or negative consequences for employers and competitiveness. And in that regard, from the outset, it is important to note that government continues its commitment to fair wages, and indeed for low-pay workers specifically in our economy, and the very real progress that we have made in raising the national minimum wage in recent years by way of substantial increases. And certainly I'm astonished that no one has actually acknowledged the significance since 2020. The national minimum wage has increased by 33.7% from 10.10 to today's rate, which is 13.50. And indeed, in 2024, we've seen a significant uplift of 12%, or 140 in the minimum wage. And this year, the minimum wage will increase by 80 cents, with an increase of over 6%. And indeed, from the 1st of January next year, we will see the national minimum wage increase again by 65 cents, which represents another 4.8% increase to 14.50. And by any yardstick, I think that is significant, and it is recognition of our commitment to continue to support low-pay workers and ensure that they get fair wages. And these increases were and are ahead of inflation, and indeed the projected wage growth have brought about substantial real wage growth for low-paid workers in our economy. Our current rate of 13.50 an hour means that Ireland is the second highest minimum wage in the EU, second only to Luxembourg, and among the highest in the world. And I think that's recognition of where we've travelled since 2020. And when we look at the adjusted purchasing power standards, we are the 5th highest minimum wage in the EU. And indeed, this bill proposes to make changes to the National Minimum Wage Act, and government's view is that this is a significant policy change in the operation of the bill, and it is currently drafted and may be counterproductive to work underway at national and European level. And on the basis, I propose that the House opposes the National Minimum Wage Bill 2025, and I would like now to address the sections of the bill separately to explain the rationale behind each of the recommendations provided. Firstly, I'd like to turn to the first group of workers that are subject to the bill, and that's young people, and just to acknowledge everyone that's in the gallery here tonight. Sub-minimum youth rates are the age-based regime of the national minimum wage, where those aged 19 and under can be paid a percentage of the national minimum wage. Employees aged 18 and 19 are entitled to a sub-minimum wage of 80% and 90% of the overall national minimum wage respectively, and the sub-minimal rates for employees aged under 18 are set at 70% of the national minimum wage. The current regime of sub-minimum youth rates was introduced in recognition of the statutory restrictions on youth workers' working hours and conditions, and to protect youth employment and to avoid incentivising early school leaving. We know that the majority of young people are not in receipt of those rates and are instead paid the full minimum wage. And we also know that this is a very complex and nuanced issue. And for example, the incidence of sub-minimal rates varies considerably amongst those of that age. And indeed, Senator Joe Riley raised the stat that 5 out of 6 of employers don't pay the sub-minimum wage. And indeed, if you look at those in receipt of those rates, we see that only 7% receive, at the age of 19, receive the rate, while 46% of those aged 18 or under. And indeed, there is a disproportionate concentration at different sectors and ceilings. And we also know that the sub-minimum youth rates employment is disproportionately concentrated in areas like accommodation, food, wholesale and retail sectors. Indeed, earlier this year, as part of the measures designed to support and build resilience in businesses and support competitiveness, the government agreed to defer the decision on sub-minimal youth rates until 2029. This decision was considered in the context of the recent significant increases in the minimum wage. And we should also remember that the current system of youth rates is based on the percentage of the full minimum wage. And when the minimum wage increases, these sub-minimal rates also increase, with young people in receipt of those rates seeing a commensurable increase in their wages. My department recently published an economic impact assessment of the Low Pay Commission's recommendations to abolish the sub-minimal youth rates of the national minimum wage. And this report also echoes the Low Pay Commission's finding that this is a complex issue that will require the full deliberation and consideration of government. In regards to apprenticeships, and I know like to consider the treatment of apprenticeships under the National Minimum Wage Act, and where the national minimum wages were introduced in 2020, it was determined that apprenticeships would be excluded from that act. Apprenticeships were and continue to be excluded from the national wage in recognition of the unique nature of apprenticeships and the fact that a long-established practice for determining rates which adequately protect apprenticeships exists. Apprenticeships offer a unique combination of education and work experience. When the national minimum wage was first introduced, it was recognised that providing an exemption for apprenticeships would promote and encourage employers to focus on training apprenticeships and offer opportunities for them, while at the same time recognising the cost to employers in terms of time invested and productivity foregone. Apprenticeships are employees, and all of the 78 apprenticeship programmes are undertaken under a contract of employment. And for the majority of apprenticeships, the rate of pay is agreed between the apprentice and the employer, with the employer paying the apprenticeships during both the on-job and the off-job training element. For the 25 craft apprenticeship programmes, the minimum rates of pay applying under the employment contract are either agreed with the relevant sector or are set out in the legally binding sectorial employment orders recommended by the Labour Court. I am fully aware of the importance of the apprenticeships as education and training routes for our people, and of the importance of apprenticeships in our economy. And many have recognised that importance, and the government is strongly committed to continuing to grow and strengthen Ireland's apprenticeship system. And we have demonstrated this with substantial investment in expanding apprenticeships in recent years, with investment of €67 million and €77 million and €79 million over consecutive budgets from 2024 to 2026 respectively. And this amounts to a more than doubling of the annual allocation since 2020. This investment will deliver significant results. Annual apprenticeship registrations have increased from 5,326 in 2020 to over 9,352 by the end of 2024. Furthermore, the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science is committed to developing a new action plan for apprenticeships to cover the period from 2026 to 2030. This new action plan, which is a programme for government commitment, has a headline target of 12,500 annual apprenticeship registrations by 2030, with approximately 2/3 concentrated in craft and construction-related disciplines. A public consultation will seek the views of all stakeholders on how the system can be improved and made more inclusive and better aligned to our national skills needs, and that will commence shortly. So indeed, we do want to hear back from the sectors that desperately need these skilled apprenticeships, and we would very much hope that that would be a very inclusive consultation process, and any evidence submitted as part of that consultation will inform the development of the action plan and the development of evidence-based policy on the exemption of apprenticeships from the national minimum wage. The final category of workers covered by the bill is interns. The government believes that all workers should be rewarded for the work they perform, and that no individual should be exploited by performing work and not be rewarded fairly. And the government strongly believes that genuine internships based on training opportunities can be mutually beneficial for both the intern, who gains first-hand real-world experience, and for employers who gain from having another individual to perform tasks, often within a fresh perspective in the case of current students and recent graduates. It is important to protect genuine internships, and in this regard we have been careful with any legislative change we consider, and I understand the private member's bill is particularly concerned with arrangements where a person is undertaking work of benefit to an enterprise or other host organisation, with the danger that such internship could be exploitive. Arrangements which may be described as internships are not defined by Irish legislation. The designation intern by itself has no bearing on the determination of the employment status of an individual engaged. Under current employment law, a person is either a trainee or volunteer and or an employee, where employees which are protected by the National Minimum Wage Act and are accordingly entitled to the protections of that Act. Therefore, while the government acknowledges the intent of the bill, it does not necessarily provide any additional and enforceable rights to interns not already available in the current legislation. All individuals engaged under a contract of employment are covered under the National Minimum Wage Act of 2000 and are thus entitled to the national minimum wage. An important point is that a contract of employment is defined as any contract. However, it is described whereby an individual agrees with other person to do or to perform personally any work for service for that person or a third person. There is no exemption in law for the obligation to pay the rates laid down by the National Minimum Wage Act where actual work is being performed. Therefore, the National Minimum Wage rates applied to work experience, the National Minimum Wage rates applied to work experience placements, work trials, internships, and any other employment practice, regardless of the duration of engagement. And the right to receive the minimum wage when work has been performed cannot be waived in a contract, or any provision in an agreement to do so is void as a matter of law. It is also important that I highlight the work that's been done at both an EU level on the EU Traineeship Directive. The Commission proposes that the directive is transposed, the directive in March of 2024, with two objectives: to improve and enforce the working conditions of trainees as workers, and to combat regular employment relations being disguised as traineeships. And for Ireland, it is important that that directive does not create a third category of worker. A trainee with an employment contract or employment relations is entitled to the same suite of employment protections, the same as any other employee. And we want to ensure that the directive does not create a third category of worker which could entitle trainees to fewer or greater employment protections when compared to others. So in conclusion, while the intent of this bill is commendable and its subject matter deeply important, we must ensure that the legislative response is robustly assessed, informed by evidence, and provided for within an appropriate legislative framework. It is for these reasons that I have recommended that the bill should be opposed, and given the reasons I've outlined, in particular to the recent government decisions on sub-minimal youth rates of the national minimum wage, the forthcoming public consultation and the development of the action plan for apprenticeships, the current protections for interns and the negotiations of the EU Traineeship Directive, I urge that the House to reject the National Minimum Wage, inclusive of young persons, apprenticeships and interns bill of 2024.
Ara Dillon, Dímini Sharon Shandor Cosgrove.
To say I'm disgusted is an understatement, Minister, to be honest. So clearly some of us are equal, or all of us are equal, but some are more equal than others. I don't know how that you're able to stand up here in front of all these young people, in front of trade unionists, that I invited you all to come to. And fair play to Senator O'Reilly. He showed up today. He came. He listened. He listened to the voice of people that are representing people working in trades. He listened to ICTU's arguments about pushing forward and supporting this bill, and he listened to representatives from the National Youth Council of Ireland. And he was able to have the bravery to stand up and say, "Yeah, you know what? They're right. This is exploitation of young workers. This is exploitation. We are treating people that shouldn't be treated. People are doing the same level of work, and they should be treated fairly." Like I actually thought, since I've come into this House, I thought at least, what I was expecting was going to be a timed amendment, because you said yourself there it's so complicated. If it's that complicated, why didn't you give us a timed amendment and give us 12 months so we can discuss it? Is that what committees are supposed to be about? That we can discuss it? You asked us to engage. I invited you to engage, and you didn't show up. There was all the opposition here showed up, and thank you for doing it, and thank you for showing up in masses today to the briefing today. It was a really important briefing, and it obviously was able to change someone like Senator O'Reilly's mind. But yeah, you talk about engagement. This isn't engagement. This is becoming like a dictatorship. Everything we introduce into this House, it's just rejected. Like, this is our fourth private members' bill that we put in here, and it's the three of them I thought would go into the filing cabinet of timed amendments, but it's not. This is totally just dismissed, and you actually encouraged people here to reject it. I know people across the side of the House want to vote their conscience, because know this is the right thing to do. And I know that. We can see from the low representation of the government benches here today that I know people want to vote for this. So you could, I agree with Senator Crockwell here that this is in your gift, Minister. You could decide, you can decide, we're going to push it out for a year. And surely this is what timed amendments are about. You know, I think, and I mean, this argument that 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds, at 16 you can drive a motorbike, you can actually get a pilot licence, you can drive a tractor at 16. 18-year-olds, you can get married, you can vote. So this idea that because of your age you determine that you're going to be paid less for exactly the same job as what you're doing with someone older than you is outdated, it's unfair, and it's discriminatory. Apprenticeships, we know we're in the middle of an absolute housing catastrophe, but apprenticeships, 20% of apprentices are dropping out in their very first year. Like, how is this solving the housing crisis? How is this engaging? But if you would come today and listen to Connect Trade Union, Paddy Cavan, the representative there, you would have seen that they're driving this neoliberal politics that you're driving, and that you're continuing to drive this circle of privilege. You will see that 47% of apprentices have dropped out in the UK in the first year. So we're heading off a cliff. If we keep going with this, that we're bringing bills up here in opposition and you're just rejecting them, we're heading off a cliff. We're all in this together. That's why I got elected, saying we're all in this together. We're here to work together, but clearly we're not. And if you can stand here, 3 out of 5 young people are thinking of leaving our country because of the housing crisis, because of the cost of living crisis, and apprenticeships. We need them more than ever. They're not taking up these jobs. So I don't know how you can't listen to this, why you won't reconsider pushing it down for 12 months, and I'd be accepting of that. You talk about the Apprentices Action Plan. Is this going to be the same action plan that you've had the housing plan? The disaster, the action plan that's been a housing plan? Like, is the minimum wage going to be in that for apprenticeships? And even if it is, even if we get the perfect action plan, what about young workers? Are they still going to be exploited? And you know what, even within young workers, it's actually exploited to women workers. I heard today in the briefing today as well that young hairdressers apprenticeships they're not even getting incremental rent to pay. So they're actually being doubled down on, being discriminatory on. I'm disgusted, to be honest. I actually thought that people would have. I really commend Senator O'Reilly for listening, and I would encourage other people in the opposition benches to do the same, and the government benches. Opposition to me, I suppose, to do the same. Thank you.
Garmagat on Shandor. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Is that agreed? Agreed. Those in favour say Thaw. Those against say Neil. The question is defeated. Both are. Those in favour say Thaw. Those against say Neil. The question is defeated. Both are.
Sorry, I should say second stage. Oh no, yeah, I should. Non-amendment, sorry.
Yeah,
It's perfect, yeah.
second stage of the bill now be read. For objecting? Yeah. Anish. National minimum wage, inclusion of young persons, apprentices and interns, Bill 2025, second stage. The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers, Senator Nessa Cosgrove and Senator Laura Harman, Neil, Senator Garrett Ahern and Senator Paul Daly. The division will be conducted electronically. The voting interval is 1 minute starting Inish. On the question that the bill be now read a second time, the result of the vote, Tá 14, Neil 28, the question is defeated. Could I ask the leader, when is it proposed to sit again?
Tomorrow morning at 9:30.
Is that agreed? The House stands adjourned from 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning.